Hello, Jose. Thank you for taking part and agreeing to be a part of this research project as part of the doctoral dissertation titled Social Inclusion and Participation in the Design of the Post-2015 Agenda, now known as Agenda 2030, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Your role and experience in the post-2015 process will provide significant input about the level of social inclusion of this development process. Thank you, Jose. If you can give us your name and affiliation, please.
Thank you, Juan. My name is Jose Dallo. I'm currently the head of the UNEP office for the Southern Cone in Latin America. And before this, I was engaged in the post-2015 team that in UNDG facilitated the inclusion of the voices of the peoples into the intergovernmental discussions to agree on the SDGs and the Agenda 2030.
Thank you, Jose. In your opinion, what is the value or importance of social inclusion and participation during the design of the post-2015 development agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals?
I think we always thought that given listening to the voices of the people is basically making real the mandate that the UN has, and the first sentence of the UN chapter is "We the peoples of the United Nations." Anyone who has been working on projects and development know that the most important thing is ownership, and also that people who are close to the problem are normally those who also have the solutions.
So in your view, how has social participation influenced the post-2015 process, and what mechanisms were the most important to you?
Well, I think it fundamentally influenced at two levels. One, at the national level. So when UN country teams were doing national consultations together with the stakeholders, the private sector, civil society, and the government, somehow you start a conversation that helps government define their national positions in the intergovernmental negotiations. And also in New York, when you aggregate all that inputs and all that data, and also the different thematic consultations that you had, that also influence negotiators who are in New York defining the final set of goals and indicators. But I think beyond that, the issue of being aware of the discussion, being aware that there's a new agenda and own it, it will make also the difference not only in the negotiation and the agreement of the agenda, but also in the implementation.
So thanks, Jose. And in your view, was the design of the post-2015 agenda an inclusive process? And what evidence is there?
I think it definitely was. There was, I think, the report of the SG, I think it was in 2012, asking for an open and inclusive discussion, kick off a much more open process than the MDGs, definitely. And I think also even in the intergovernmental discussion, some of them were open for stakeholders to participate and contribute. And there were opportunities where you could hear the voices and opinions of experts, as well as civil society, private sector. You had a high-level panel where different constituencies were also represented, and also they have a chance to explain and to advocate and indicate what they think is the most important challenges humanity is facing today.
And how familiar are you with the results of the My World 2015 survey, the UN system consultations, civil society consultations, or even the UN Global Pulse big data tools? And have you participated, interacted, designed, or implemented any of these instruments? And then finally, do you think the results were transparent and accessible?
I did participate actively. I was the project manager of the UNDG consultation project, which had under this umbrella, My World, the national consultations, thematic consultations. There were also regional consultations, and there were also links with the work that civil society did in many countries as well, Global Compact and others. So I'm I'm well aware of those results and of that work. What was the second part, Juan? Could you please repeat?
Yes. So you okay? Did you participate, interact, design? I'm assuming you already answered that. But the question then is, were these results transparent and accessible in your view?
I think that they were, and I think that we did something different from before. So when we collect the results and put together the reports that we share with member states and online, we also share the data. And I think that's one of the big difference from previous consultations that the UN have been hosting, where you could only see the final results but not where the results come from. And we, for example, had in the World We Want web platform a space where you could, for example, make the link between different concepts and see in which part of the planet that conversation took place and who said what. And so somehow you have all the database, and we encourage also people and civil society and others to, if they wanted, to identify their view on the results and use that data to inform their positions in the way they thought it was better.
Do you think the results of the aforementioned tools were useful or easy to make sense of?
I think yes. I mean, we try to make the easiest possible toolkit for accessing the information. It was sometimes very difficult to, for example, put into accessible data qualitative information that you had. I think that was one of the main challenges. But I think it was also because we have many sources, one complement each other. So you have, remember, Twitter analysis of what people were saying on Twitter, and compare that to what was saying in the UNDG sponsored consultations, together with links to the website of the high-level panel or the open working group. I mean, it was a complex process, but I think there were, good tools that allow normal people to go online and check what was the calendar, what was happening, and what was the opinion of different peoples in the world.
Thank you, Jose. In your view, were these results presented in a timely manner to policymakers? Did they have any impact on the design of the post-2015 agenda? And do you think the SDG proposal is inclusive?
I think they did. I mean, of course, you could do it always. You could have done it better. You find ways. I mean, you could now. If I have to design again, the project will change things. But for example, in conversations with missions in New York, I remember ambassadors saying, "I have read my country's national consultation report, and that's why I'm changing this position." And also the informal conversations. I think that was one of the question that you asked before, how, which were the main channels of influence. I think a lot of the influence came of bringing the UN together and having the same message across the board, and was basically presenting the data and the results of the consultations and inform negotiations in New York, since sometimes there's a gap between capitals and also the people seated negotiating in the UN headquarters.
So in your view, was the proposal inclusive?
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, we developed, in the case of the UN dialogues, specific guidelines trying to encourage participation of traditionally excluded groups, widows, people. I remember, for example, in Salvador, there were consultations with gang people who are in jail. So there was a lot of effort to go an extra mile and find and go to the people that normally don't have access to these kind of consultations. In the case of My World Survey, there was a huge amount of the votes who were offline. So it was not only an online platform to do a survey, but also through partnership with civil society organizations, we were able to get millions of votes offline of people who don't have access to internet.
And okay, so did you feel as an individual represented during the SDG design process, and what could have been improved in terms of social participation during the design process of the post-2015 agenda and the SDGs?
I felt reflected. I think what you always need for consultations probably is more time, because each country has their own times. And if you want to particularly be inclusive, then the people who normally don't participate sometimes don't have the time, or don't live so close to the capital or to the internet, to do all the tools and means to participate. So I think a longer process in the consultation would have been helpful, but the political reality was that. I think, of course, building on the other 16 networks that the UN has had, so you don't need to start from scratch, would have been also very good. And I think would have been also good for some people to be convinced from the beginning that people want to participate. I remember receiving a lot of criticism saying people are tired of being consulted all the time. I think they're tired to be consulted if the results of the consultation don't go anywhere. But if they feel that what they say is taken into account, or at least is put on the table, and we know it's an intergovernmental process, but it's at least governments know that's the information, I think they are more than happy to dedicate their time, because at the end of the day, it's their future.
Right. And if I were to ask you, if you could describe, off the top of your head, at least 2 examples of programs and or policies designed to foster social inclusion and participation, could you name a couple?
Regarding the post-2015 agenda, or any?
Outside of the post-2015, 2 examples outside of this particular one.
I think one of the things I really enjoyed when I was working in Honduras was the work that we do in the northwest part of the country, and basically the first phase of any intervention that we will be doing there was to dedicate time just to know the people and share with them the ideas. That started a long dialogue and really helped us getting really quick, good results for them and build the trust. Let me explain that to you. So that was basically going to visit, the different communities, and the mayor could ask you, look, I have this window broken in the school. I need $200 to solve the problem. If you ask him to prepare a project document fully fledged with all the indicators, he will never do it. It will take 2 years, and he won't get anything. So we're able to have this fund below $1,000 each of the contributions of quick action, and say, look, mayor, bring me 2 photographs. One of the door completely, broken. The other one with the door fixed. You said it's $200. Here's the $200. Fix the door of your school. And that created a lot of ownership, and I think participation. And because it was, they identified the problem, they solved the problem, and they had the solutions. It worked really well also to start talking about more difficult issues about, for example, land reform or tax reform. I think that's one of the examples. The other example that I would like to mention is about gender violence. And I remember in Uruguay at some point we discussed with all the TV stations to turn off the colors of the TVs when they had every night, a gender violence news. So people start at the beginning. Everyone was, having dinner and thinking that maybe their TV was broken, and suddenly it turned back to the colors, and they thought, well, there's probably something wrong in the TV. But if it happened every day, they started to comment that with their colleagues, and they realized after a while in the whole society that it was basically something happening every day in their countries, although they were not aware. And I think that created a lot of momentum, because people realized that was happening. It was not necessarily a consultation, but I think somehow engaged, the whole country in being aware and trying to find a solution for the problem.
Wow, that's a very interesting example, Jose. Thank you for that. Could you describe at least two cases where inclusion and participation were decisive in designing inclusive and successful public policies?
I think one of the example where inclusion and happening in my country when we were getting out of the dictatorship, some of the political parties were outside the legal borders, and somehow was only by bringing everyone in the same tent and allowing everyone to express themselves that a dialogue was possible and agreement was done on the main routes and guides that Spain should take. And for more than 40 years, it has been a healthy and I think quite successful democracy. That's maybe more high level, but I think that's one good example. The other one is I was last week in Paraguay discussing with some business people, which could be the design of quality seals for their business, particularly for the ones who deal with chemists and chemicals. And we brought different parameters and experiences from different countries, but it was only after the whole day discussion which are the concrete situations of their business, of the country, of the networks that they have, that we realize how needed that workshop was, and I think they realize the opportunities that they had. And again, because the final outcome of the workshop was a mix of the best practices that you could find in different countries with the lenses of the Paraguayans and which are the realities that they face every day. I think that was the success of that day, to find a mid-level where they had the ownership. It reflected their demands, their opportunities, their challenges, and at the same time was building on the best practices that you could find and that UN brought to the table. So I think that's maybe another example where you could say you got a much better outcome by fostering participation and inclusion. Inclusion not only of the people, in this case of Paraguay, but also inclusion of best examples outside Paraguay.
Thank you, Jose. Last question. Taking into account the lessons of the post-2015 design process, can you name at least 3 recommendations to foster inclusion and participation in specific terms around the implementation of the post-2015 agenda and the SDGs?
I think the first recommendation would, behind each SDG, you normally have UN regulations and a human rights approach. So that by definition brings you the must of inclusion and participation. I think the second one is that because the goals are so ambitious, and not only depends on what governments are going to do, but what private sector and peoples are going to do, you need that inclusion and bring everyone on board if you want to really deliver on these ambitious goals. And third one is that the goals and the agenda require changing the way we behave and the way we consume and produce and work. And that's going to change only if we feel that we're part of the process and also implement the solution. For that, I think key will be the information of accessible, qualitative, and reliable data.
Well, that's been very, very useful, Jose. I would like to thank you very much for participating in this interview. The content of the interview will be a part of a qualitative analysis that includes other 19 respondents from various institutions, and representing diverse actors in the international community. Thank you very much.
Thank you.